I had just moved into a new apartment, and as anyone who's lived alone for the first time can tell you, the initial excitement quickly gives way to eerie silences and unsettling thoughts. But the place was cheap, close to work, and it had large windows that let in plenty of light. I figured it was the perfect place to start fresh. The first couple of weeks went smoothly. I'd grown used to the late-night creaks and groans of the building, the occasional distant argument from the neighbors, and the unsettling hum of the city outside. Nothing out of the ordinary. But one night, things changed. It started around 2 a.m. I was lying in bed, struggling to sleep, when I heard a light tap. It was so soft at first that I thought I had imagined it, but then it came again, a faint tapping, like someone gently knocking on glass. I sat up, listening intently. It was coming from the living room window. Now, my apartment was on the 4th floor, and there was no balcony or fire escape near that window. It faced a quiet alleyway, so there shouldn't have been anyone outside. Curious but slightly on edge, I got out of bed and crept toward the living room, the tapping growing louder as I approached. When I reached the window, I hesitated. The room was dark, and all I could see was my own reflection staring back at me. For a moment, I considered turning around and going back to bed, but something inside me insisted I had to look. I reached out and pulled the curtain aside. Standing on the other side of the glass was a man. I stumbled back, my heart pounding in my chest. The man was tall, with pale skin that seemed almost translucent in the dim light of the street lamp below. His face was gaunt, his eyes dark and sunken, and his mouth stretched into a wide, unnerving smile. His hands were pressed against the glass, fingers splayed, as if he was trying to peer into my apartment. The most disturbing part, though, was his eyes. They didn't blink. They were locked onto mine, as if he had been waiting for me to look at him. I stood frozen, unable to move, my mind racing. How was he standing there? There was no ledge, no platform, nothing that could support him. He was just there, staring through the window with that terrifying smile. Finally, I managed to snap out of my trance and stumbled back into my bedroom, slamming the door behind me. My heart was racing, my hands shaking. I grabbed my phone and dialed the building's security, but after several rings, there was no answer. I tried calling the police, but by the time I had the words to explain what was happening, I realized something. There was no sound coming from the window anymore. The tapping had stopped. Cautiously, I opened the bedroom door and peeked out into the living room. The window was just as I had left it, curtain drawn aside, revealing the empty alley below. The man was gone. I convinced myself it had been a dream, or maybe some sort of waking nightmare. I was sleep-deprived, stressed from work. I had to be imagining things. But that smile, the way his eyes locked onto mine, it was so vivid, too real to be a hallucination. I slept with the lights on that night. The next morning, I inspected the window. No handprints, no smudges, no sign that anyone had been there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling of unease that hung over me. Every time I walked into the living room, I found myself glancing toward the window, half expecting to see him standing there again. For the next few nights, I didn't hear anything unusual. I started to relax, convincing myself that it had all been in my head. But on the 4th night, it happened again. I was lying in bed, reading, when I heard the tap. Tap, tap, tap. It was soft at first, almost polite, as if the man was waiting for me to come to him. My heart sank as I realized what was happening. The sound was coming from the living room window. I forced myself out of bed, my legs shaking as I walked toward the source of the noise. I didn't want to look, but I had to. I had to know if he was really there, or if I was losing my mind. When I reached the window, I paused, staring at the curtain. The tapping had stopped, but I could feel it, his presence, just beyond the glass. Slowly, I reached out and pulled the curtain aside. There he was, standing in the same spot, his hands pressed against the glass, his smile wider than before. His eyes, those dark, unblinking eyes, locked onto mine the moment I looked at him. It was like he had been waiting for me. I stumbled back, my breath catching in my throat. This time, I didn't run to my room. I stood there, frozen, staring at him, waiting for something to happen. I don't know why I didn't move. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was curiosity. But I couldn't look away. Then, without warning, the man moved. He lifted one of his hands from the glass and slowly pointed to the window latch. His smile never wavered, but his eyes seemed to darken, as if he was daring me to open the window, to let him in. I shook my head, my pulse racing, and stepped back farther. But the man didn't move. He just stood there, fingers still pointing at the latch, waiting. Finally, I tore my gaze away from him and bolted back into my bedroom, slamming the door shut. I locked it, shoved a chair under the handle, and crawled into bed, pulling the covers over my head like a child hiding from a nightmare. My heart was hammering in my chest, my mind racing with thoughts I couldn't control. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I decided to call in sick to work. I couldn't focus, couldn't think about anything but that man at the window. I debated moving, finding another place to live, but something told me it wouldn't matter. He would find me wherever I went. By the time night fell, I had made up my mind to leave the apartment. I started packing my things, moving quickly, hoping to be gone before the sun set. But as I was shoving clothes into a suitcase, I heard it again. Tap, tap, tap. It was louder this time, more insistent. I froze, the hair on the back of my neck standing up. The man was back. Slowly, I turned toward the living room. The curtain was already drawn aside, just as I had left it earlier, and through the window, I could see him. He was standing closer this time, almost pressed up against the glass, his smile wider than ever, his eyes gleaming with something sinister. I couldn't take it anymore. I grabbed my phone and called the police, my hands shaking as I tried to explain what was happening. They told me they'd send someone over, but I couldn't wait. I packed the rest of my things in a blind panic, grabbed my keys, and ran out of the apartment without looking back. I drove to a friend's house, where I spent the night, but I didn't tell them what had happened. I didn't want to sound crazy. The next morning, I got a call from the police. They had gone to the apartment to investigate but found nothing. No sign of forced entry, no strange man at the window. It was as if he had never been there. But I know what I saw. Even now, weeks later, I can still hear the tapping. Sometimes, late at night, when I'm alone, I'll hear that soft tap, tap, tap on the window, and I know he's out there, watching, waiting.